The good old trope of one hero versus many enemies. There are really only two reasons why this makes any sort of sense, the first of which I'm not interested in for the purpose of this video, which is magic. When you're talking the kind of superpowered shenanigans that make a middle-aged one-eyed dude with a saber scare the crap out of a tank driver, well, of course they can take on an army. How about descending down a little closer to Earth with at least a semblance of realism? What's the only other reason why this works? Well, completely incompetent goons who can't coordinate, who are weak and unskilled and stupid. Bunglers! You know, the kinds of goons who seem to have the team-working skills of a high schooler, or you expect one person in the group to do all the work, and if they fail, then I guess it's your turn now. And speaking of turns, that seems to be the main mechanic here. Turn-based combat. Even in The Witcher, you know, Geralt being superhuman, enhanced, who can very arguably deal with multiple enemies, with magic at his disposal as well, even there, the enemies decide to advance one at a time, politely lining up so he never has to deal with more than one. So this is more of an endurance test than fighting multiple opponents, because you're in fact fighting individual duels one at a time. Speaking of one hero versus many, this video is sponsored by Sifu, a beat-em-up game grounded in realistic hand-to-hand fighting. The techniques are based on Pak Mai Kung Fu, and the developers work directly with a real-life Sifu of that style. The variety of the attacks and finishers are quite impressive, and the animations are so smooth I can't believe it's not butter. Interestingly, the in-game lore explains your ability to try again after you failed as the character being revived by a magical pendant that allows him to keep gaining experience, but at the cost of aging with each resurrection. Well, defeating the team of 5 dangerous martial artists that killed your family is not supposed to be easy, so you're gonna have to keep honing your reflexes and developing your skills if you don't want to keep getting wrecked by some goon armed with a beer bottle. Speaking of bottles, there are various weapons you can pick up and use, and parts of the environment are destructible. The physical game has been released on May 3rd, 2022, and there's also a special edition with art book, downloadable soundtrack, and a metal game box. Box editions are available on PS4 and 5, as well as on PC. Check it out, link down below. Here's a particularly funny example of everybody politely waiting their turn. The master takes on every student, more or less individually. Some of them seem to do or pretend to do things briefly at times, but basically you can take this guy down and punch him for half an hour, and everybody else is just shuffling their feet, you know, doing the shepherd shuffle. Even when it's seemingly a coordinated attack, like against Sir Arthur Dayne in Game of Thrones, when you actually take a closer look, a lot of the time they do absolutely nothing. They've got him surrounded, and he doesn't make any kind of attempt to use strategic movement to maybe get them in front of him most of the time, rather than being surrounded. But I can see why. You might as well do some twirling. Who cares? They're not really threatening you. You know what's the biggest problem with real life? Okay, one of the biggest problems. The complete and utter lack of plot armor. How are we supposed to get heroic deeds done without mystical plot armor? I mean, being rushed by 3 guys who actually attack you all at once? That's unfair. How dare you? Not everybody in real life can be as much of a invincible badass as Steven Seagal in his own mind. So the problem is, whenever you encounter someone in some sort of fight, you know, self-defense on the street, or, you know, barroom brawl, or whatever it might be, the greater the number of opponents, the greater the chance of running into somebody who is just straight up better than you. More skilled, more experienced, more physically fit. The more there are, the more there is a chance that just one of them, by themselves, just one, could whoop your ass. But now they have help from others. Now, winning a fight against multiple attackers in real life isn't impossible, it's just extremely difficult, and you need to compensate for being outnumbered in some way. One is being a lot better than each of the attackers. I mean, how many preschoolers could you beat up? 50? More? I don't know. I don't condone that, by the way, YouTube. Chill out. This is just hypothetical and a joke, by the way. And of course, this is often done in movies and video games, where the hero just fights a bunch of unskilled goons. Sometimes they crank it up so far that it just loses credibility. Like in this scene here, where multiple attackers rush this guy with sticks, and he just parries them all. This requires essentially superhuman speed, or the attackers have got to be really freaking slow. Because 3 against you, sure, he's dual wielding 2, and they have 1 each, but that's still 3 against 2, and yeah, this is not very easy. Particularly if they were to actually be smart and not just rush him in a row from the front, but try to get around and flank him, it's over. It's just, you can't allow that to happen in real life. Basically, the primary goal is to remove threats as quickly as possible so that the hero is not as outnumbered anymore. So the hero can't be defensive, but must charge them immediately and just take them out as quickly as humanly possible. And in fact, you see that sometimes in footage of real-life street fights where one guy takes out multiple posers by basically walking up to them one at a time and just sucker punching the crap out of them and just dropping them in one punch. It can and has happened like that. It's just that your power level needs to be quite a bit higher than theirs. Even then, that's not always a guarantee. I found a video of an MMA fighter doing some sparring with 2 friends, and he is clearly more skilled, but when they coordinate well, they can sometimes gang up on him and put a lot of pressure on him that he just can't really skill his way out of, if you know what I mean. Overall, he's doing great in this video. His skill is definitely helping him out, and endurance, that's a big one. When faced with multiple attackers, you need plenty of stamina to not gas out throughout and didn't be taken down by somebody who was fresh. So big skill gap is one way. Another way is to cheat, quote unquote, you know, get an advantage in a different way. And this is where armed fighting comes into play. There are lots of ways in which you can have a significant advantage. For example, I've done 1v2 sparring where I was using a spear or pole arm and the opponents were using swords. So I had a massive reach advantage, and as long as I kept using movement, you know, my footwork to keep them in front of me and prevent myself from being surrounded, and as long as I managed to take out one of the 2 pretty quickly, I did well. Not always. Again, if they coordinated well, you know, one keeps me occupied and the other rushes in and lands a hit. So, but at least I had a chance. You know, if everybody is armed with the same weapon, like say everybody has a longsword or an arming sword or whatever, it's extremely difficult. Then the only thing you have is your skill needs to be significantly higher. If the defender uses everything at their disposal, including dirty tricks like throwing a dagger in somebody's face before you follow up with spear thrusts, then you have a pretty decent chance. Or like in this case, the 2 attackers are using single rapier and the defender is using rapier and dagger, which is not a massive advantage, but it helps. It helps sort of shorten the gap. It works, it chips away at the disadvantage of being outnumbered. This is just 2 though. Just 1v2 already is pretty freaking difficult. 3 is extremely difficult, and more, well, you're getting really screwed over. There is a fight scene that I commented on quite a while ago, link down below if you haven't seen it yet, of one fully armored knight versus multiple medieval goons, basically. And at the time, I was a little bit too generous. Like I was presenting it as, yeah, this is completely plausible. It's stretching it a little bit because there were plenty of attackers. But I was surprised to see something like see armor shown in a proper way, because we often have this movie trope of armor is made of cardboard or paper mache or whatever and doesn't do anything to protect you. In this case, it does, and you can see that the knight is taking damage. He's definitely getting bruised up, maybe getting a concussion, things like that. But this is another situation where this can work. Again, if you're better equipped, armor can definitely compensate for this to an extent, because the problem in unarmored, armed fighting, or in hand-to-hand unarmed fighting, there's too many arms. The problem is you can't afford to take hits. Even in unarmed fighting, if you take multiple hits, you may be in a lot of trouble. Even if you don't get knocked out, it's just getting hit from multiple angles. And in fact, this is something that I used to do when I practiced KC fighting method. KFN doesn't exist anymore, by the way, but one of the two founders is now doing an updated version of that system. It's called TriTac. And anyway, so one of the things we did during practice was to defend against multiple attackers. And I used defend sort of loosely, because basically what that was is several students with focus pads just keep wailing away at you, and your job is to try to keep protecting yourself as much as possible. Mainly defending your head, because that's the prime target, so you keep trying to absorb these blows as much as possible, and you're just supposed to go for a while. The point of this is to learn to deal with the pressure and stay calm under stress, and also train your endurance, because it's incredibly exhausting. So basically, the more realistic, down-to-earth version of this is, in order to win against multiple enemies, the hero needs to do whatever they can to become as OP as possible. You know, better skill, better physical fitness, better equipment, better tactics. Just whatever kind of advantage you can carve out, you're gonna need it desperately, particularly the more attackers there are. There is this one video of, what was this, 50 people versus 3 expert fencers. And this is pretty interesting, because of course you can see the skill gap, but also this is quite an artificial situation, because everybody had this little balloon in the center of the chest. That was the only valid target. So of course you can do stuff like this and go for much longer and take on much more opponents if there are strict rules. If people are able to charge you, tackle you, drag you to the ground, stomp you, it's, yeah, you're kind of screwed. Some people even argue in a street fight against multiple attackers, you shouldn't kick, because the risk of slipping and falling is too great. Because falling against multiple opponents is just about the worst thing that can happen. If you go down, you gotta get back up as quickly as possible, doing whatever you have to, like climbing up on somebody, just whatever you gotta do, you need to get back up, otherwise you're doomed. Anyway, some of this probably goes without saying, but it still seems like a lot of people underestimate just how difficult it is to fight multiple opponents. And yeah, figured it might be fun to talk a bit about this. So hope you found it interesting and / or entertaining. Check out the links down below. I also post previously uploaded videos that you might find interesting there as well. And yeah, thanks for watching. Have a good one, folks.